He had just finished school for the day and was walking down the familiar streets of his neighborhood. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sidewalks. Birds chirped softly, and the occasional car passed by, making the afternoon feel normal and peaceful. He adjusted his backpack, slipped his earphones a little further in, and tried to focus on the music to distract himself from the pile of homework waiting at home. As he rounded the corner near his usual shortcut through the park, he noticed a police car slowly approaching from behind. At first, he thought nothing of it. Police cars were a normal sight in his neighborhood. But then the vehicle stopped and 2 officers stepped out, blocking his path. His heart started to race. He stopped walking and pulled one earphone out. The officers looked at him with serious expressions, and a strange tension filled the air. "Hey, can you come here for a second?" one of the officers called. His voice was firm but not threatening. Still, he hesitated, unsure what was happening. He tried to take a step back, but another officer gestured for him to stay. His palms grew sweaty and a nervous knot formed in his stomach. "I didn't do anything," he said softly, more to himself than to the officers. They didn't respond immediately, just stared at him, their faces unreadable. The world around him seemed to slow down. Leaves rustled in the breeze, a dog barked somewhere down the street, and yet all he could focus on was the fear building in his chest. "Stand still. We just want to ask you a few questions," the officer said, now a little more forcefully. The words were polite enough, but there was a weight to them, an authority that made him freeze. He nodded slightly, trying to show he wasn't a threat. His voice wavered as he answered, giving his name, his age, and where he lived. The officers asked where he was going and why he was in the area. He explained that he was just walking home, that he had been at school, that he had homework waiting for him. He tried to keep his voice calm, but it trembled in spite of him. Around him, a few neighbors had stopped to watch, their eyes curious but cautious. They whispered among themselves, and he could feel their gaze weighing on him. One officer stepped closer, and he instinctively took a small step back. The officer frowned and told him not to move. He froze immediately, hands slightly raised in a gesture meant to show he wasn't doing anything wrong. His mind raced. Why were they so focused on him? He hadn't done anything. He wasn't carrying anything illegal. He was just a kid walking home. He reached into his pocket for his phone, hoping to call his mother if things got worse, but he remembered the officer's words and hesitated. The fear of making a wrong move paralyzed him. He tried to focus on breathing slowly, on staying calm, but the anxiety in his chest made it difficult. He could feel the officer's eyes on him, following every movement, measuring him, judging him. A small group of people had gathered at a distance, keeping a safe space between themselves and the situation. They whispered and pointed subtly, their curiosity palpable. The teen wished he could disappear, wished the world would swallow him up and make this nightmare end. "Do you live around here?" the officer asked. He nodded quickly. "Yes, just a few blocks away." The officer's eyes narrowed slightly, and he seemed to exchange a look with the other officer. The teen felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Something about the look told him that they were suspicious, not because of anything he had done, but because of how he looked, where he was, and who he was. He tried to explain again, repeating that he had done nothing wrong, that he was just walking home, that he didn't have anything illegal. His words seemed to fall flat, unheard or ignored. The officers didn't answer immediately. They talked quietly to each other, throwing occasional glances his way. Each glance made him flinch. His stomach twisted into knots and he felt a lump in his throat. He wished he had chosen a different route, a different time to go home, anything to avoid this moment. He glanced at the houses nearby, wishing one of his neighbors would come outside and vouch for him, wishing for any sign that someone understood that he was just a normal kid, not a suspect. But the world around him continued as if frozen in that moment. Cars passed slowly, their drivers glancing curiously, but no one stopped to intervene. The park behind him was quiet, the swing swaying gently in the breeze. Everything seemed ordinary, except for the intensity of the officer's focus on him. Trying to stay calm, he asked politely why they were stopping him. The officers didn't give a clear answer. Instead, they asked for more details about where he had been, what he had been doing, and what he planned to do next. He answered as best as he could, hoping that honesty would protect him. But the uncertainty gnawed at him. Each question felt like a test, each pause like a threat. He remembered the advice his parents had given him. Stay calm, Cooperate, don't argue. But it was hard to follow that advice when his heart was pounding, and fear was clouding his thoughts. He tried to keep his voice steady, tried to smile to show he wasn't a threat, but the officers didn't seem to notice. He felt invisible yet entirely exposed at the same time. A neighbor walked by, pretending to jog, and glanced curiously at the scene. He felt a small flicker of hope, thinking maybe someone would intervene if things got worse. But then he noticed the officers watching the neighbor as well, making the air feel even heavier. The sense of being trapped grew stronger, and he wished he could vanish into the sky like a bird, free from scrutiny and fear. He thought about his mother, about how she would react if she knew what was happening. He reached for his phone again, hesitated, and finally typed a quick message, hoping she would see it soon. "Mom, help. The cops are harassing me." He hit send before the officers could notice. The small act of reaching out gave him a tiny spark of hope in the otherwise overwhelming situation. Minutes felt like hours as he waited, the officers continuing their questioning, their tone firm but calm, their movements deliberate. He stayed still, his body tense, his mind racing with what-ifs and fears. What if they thought he was lying? What if they didn't believe him? What if he got in trouble for no reason at all? The thought of injustice, of being judged solely for who he was, pressed down on him like a heavy weight. He tried to remember happy thoughts, something that could calm him down. He thought about his little sister and how she would laugh at his messy hair when he got home. He thought about his favorite show, about music he liked, anything to distract himself from the fear and uncertainty. But it was hard to escape the reality in front of him, the intense scrutiny and the way the officer's eyes never left him. He noticed a car slowing down nearby, someone taking a closer look at the situation. The sense of being watched multiplied. He felt every heartbeat echoing in his chest, every breath a reminder that he had no control over what might happen next. The world felt heavy, and every sound, dogs barking, leaves rustling, distant voices, was amplified in his mind. He tried to make small talk, trying to humanize himself in case it helped. "It's just a regular day," he said softly. "I'm just walking home from school." His words seemed fragile, almost whispered into the vastness around him. The officers responded with questions that didn't answer his concern, focusing instead on details that made him feel small, uncertain, and misunderstood. Time stretched endlessly, each second feeling longer than the last. He wanted to explain himself again, to convince them that he was harmless, that he was just a kid. But he knew arguing could make things worse. He kept his hands visible, tried to breathe steadily, and looked around for any sign of relief, any sign that the tension might end soon. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the street, and he realized just how long he had been standing there. He was exhausted from fear, from tension, from the uncertainty that gripped him. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, yet he had no choice but to endure, to wait, to hope that someone would understand, someone would help, and that he would make it home safely. The quiet moments were interrupted by the officers' murmurs to each other. He could hear snippets of their conversation, unclear but loaded with judgment. He felt powerless, aware that no matter what he said or did, their perception of him might never match who he truly was. He wished he could speak louder than fear, but the world seemed deaf to it. As the tension continued, he clutched his backpack straps tightly, trying to anchor himself to something familiar. The familiar weight of books, of homework, of school supplies became a small comfort in the storm of fear surrounding him. He reminded himself that this would end, that he would get home, that he would see his family. The thought kept him standing, kept him from running, even though every instinct screamed at him to flee. And then he felt a small flicker of hope again, knowing that someone who cared for him would soon arrive, that the message he sent might change everything. He didn't know exactly how or when, but the hope was enough to keep him grounded. Enough to help him endure the long minutes of fear, confusion, and uncertainty, waiting for the moment that could turn everything around. The teen tried to stay calm, his heart still racing as he stood frozen on the sidewalk. Every sound felt louder, every shadow more menacing. He could see the police officers now talking quietly to each other, their faces serious. He didn't understand what he had done wrong, and the thought that he could be accused of something without reason made his chest tighten. He felt small, like the world had shrunk around him and he was trapped in the center. One officer stepped closer and asked him to show his hands. The teen obeyed, holding them up slowly, trying to show he was not a threat. Every movement was careful, deliberate, as though he were walking on a fragile surface that might shatter at any moment. The officer's gaze followed his hands, and for a brief moment, he wondered if he was being judged simply for the way he looked. "Where are you coming from?" the officer asked, his tone still calm but firm. The teen answered, explaining he was coming from school and was just heading home. He added that he had no plans to go anywhere else, hoping that honesty would help. But the officer didn't smile or nod. He just scribbled something in a notebook. Each mark on the paper seemed like a judgment, a label being placed on him without reason. The teen shifted slightly from foot to foot, trying to find a comfortable position while keeping his hands visible. His mind raced with questions. Why was this happening? Would anyone understand if he explained? Would his mother know? He wanted to call her again, but he was too scared to move too quickly. He could feel his own fear and frustration rising at the thought that he could be treated this way, simply because of who he was. The officers continued asking questions, repeating some and changing others. They asked if he had been talking to anyone, if he had been acting suspiciously, if he had been carrying anything. He answered honestly every time, but the questions felt endless, each one a reminder of how powerless he was. The air felt heavy, and the light from the setting sun did nothing to lighten the tension. He noticed people starting to gather nearby. Some were neighbors, others just passers-by curious about what was happening. A few whispered to each other, their voices low, almost like they were afraid of being overheard. He felt the weight of their eyes, and it made him feel both embarrassed and exposed. He wished he could disappear, or that someone would step in and tell the officers that he was harmless. One of the officers leaned slightly closer, squinting at him. The teen swallowed hard, trying to appear calm even though his stomach was in knots. "Do you live around here?" the officer asked again. He nodded, explaining the same thing he had before. The officer made another note, then looked at his partner. They exchanged a brief glance that made the teen feel even more uneasy. He wondered what they were thinking, why they seemed so suspicious when he had done nothing wrong. He remembered the advice his mother had given him many times. Stay calm, don't argue, follow instructions. He tried to follow that advice, but it was difficult when his fear was so strong. His mind jumped to worst-case scenarios, imagining that he could be taken somewhere he didn't want to go, or that someone would assume he had done something wrong. He couldn't understand why a normal walk home had turned into a frightening ordeal. He shifted slightly, trying to relax, but the officer's eyes followed his every movement. It was impossible to feel safe when someone was watching you so closely. He noticed that they seemed to be measuring him, like every small gesture could be interpreted as a threat. The thought made him feel like he was under a microscope, every detail of himself being examined unfairly. A nearby neighbor walked past, pretending to be on a jog but stealing glances at the scene. The teen felt a small flicker of hope, thinking maybe someone would intervene if things escalated. But the officers seemed aware of everyone around them, and their attention remained fixed on him. The sense of being trapped grew stronger, and he wished he could just vanish. He tried to distract himself by thinking about normal things, like homework, music, and what he would eat for dinner. But the thoughts were difficult to hold on to because the fear and tension in his body were so strong. Every sound, the bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of a car, felt amplified, reminding him that he was still in a dangerous, uncontrollable situation. The officers' questions continued. They asked about his friends, where he had been earlier, and even about his family. Each question made him more anxious. He felt a growing need to explain himself, to prove that he was just a regular kid, but the officers didn't seem interested in understanding him. They were focused on suspicion, not the truth. He reached for his phone again, trembling slightly. He wanted to call his mother, to let her know what was happening, but he hesitated, unsure how the officers would react. Finally, he typed a short message and sent it, hoping she would see it quickly. "Mom, I need you. The cops are questioning me." Sending it gave him a small sense of relief, a tiny spark of hope that someone he trusted would arrive soon and help him out of this situation. Minutes stretched endlessly. The officers exchanged words quietly between themselves, and the teen could hear snippets of their conversation. They were discussing his movements, his answers, and his appearance, but they didn't ask for his opinion or perspective. He felt invisible in one sense and hypervisible in another, judged unfairly by people who had the power to change his day entirely. He shifted his weight again, trying to relax but failing. He kept his hands raised slightly, his posture non-threatening, hoping that every careful gesture would help prove he wasn't a threat. But the uncertainty was unbearable. Each glance from the officers made his heart leap. Each step he took felt risky, and every sound in the environment felt like a potential danger. The crowd had grown slightly, but no one approached too closely. Some watched silently, some whispered, and a few took videos on their phones. The teen felt a mix of embarrassment and helplessness. He wanted someone to step in, to explain to the officers that he hadn't done anything wrong, but he also feared that anyone approaching might make things worse. He thought about his mother again, picturing her arriving and seeing him standing there tense and scared. The thought made him feel both comforted and more anxious. Comforted because he knew she would help. Anxious because he didn't know how long it would take for her to arrive. He could feel his fear slowly mixing with anticipation, a complex knot of emotions that made it difficult to think clearly. The officers asked more questions, this time about where he had been in the last hour, who he had seen, and what he planned to do next. He answered honestly each time, repeating that he had been at school and was heading home. The repetition made him feel trapped like a small animal cornered by a predator. He wanted to explain more, to give context, to be seen as human, but the officers' questions left little room for that. The teen felt a growing sense of frustration. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was being questioned in a way that felt invasive and unfair. He wanted to shout, to plead, to explain that he was just a kid, but he kept his voice calm, hoping that patience and cooperation would protect him. The tension in his body made it hard to stay still, yet he knew moving too quickly could make things worse. He noticed the shadows growing longer as the sun dipped further, the light fading from the streets. The approaching evening made the situation feel even more serious, more urgent. He wanted to get home before dark, wanted to be safe, but the officer's presence made that impossible. He felt trapped, caught between fear and hope, unsure which would dominate. Finally, he sensed a slight change. The officers seemed to pause, as if waiting for something, and he realized he had sent the message to his mother. He hoped she had received it, hoped she would come quickly and change everything. The anticipation made him restless, his hands twitching slightly, his body tense as he waited for a solution that felt both impossible and inevitable. He focused on breathing slowly, trying to calm himself, trying to anchor his thoughts to something tangible. He thought about home, about the familiar comfort of his room, about his mother's voice, and about the safety he had taken for granted just moments ago. Holding on to these thoughts helped him endure the long, tense minutes as the officers continued their questioning, unaware that his mother would soon arrive and shift everything. The teen's mind raced with scenarios, imagining how the situation could end badly or well. He thought about what he would say, how he would react, and how he would explain what had happened once he was safe. The fear was strong, but so was the determination to survive this moment, to keep his composure, and to hope that help would arrive soon. Each passing minute was a struggle, but he clung to the idea that relief was coming, that someone who truly understood the situation would be there to protect him. He stood on the sidewalk, tense and exhausted, yet holding on to hope. He had done everything he could to cooperate, to show he was not a threat, and now he could only wait. The world felt heavy and uncertain, yet within that uncertainty, a tiny spark of hope began to glow, promising that the ordeal might not last much longer, that help was on the way, and that his fear might soon be replaced by relief. The teen was tense, barely breathing, when he saw the familiar car turning the corner. His heart leapt with hope and fear all at once. He recognized it immediately, the kind of authority and calm that only came with someone who could make things stop. The officers noticed it too, their expressions stiffening as the car approached and the driver stepped out. His mother walked briskly toward him, her presence commanding yet composed. She didn't rush, but every step had purpose. The crowd of neighbors watching seemed to take notice too, whispering among themselves about who had arrived. The teen felt a rush of relief mixed with awe. Everything seemed to shift in the air the moment she appeared. The officers immediately straightened, exchanging a glance as though realizing the situation had changed completely. One of them cleared his throat, and the way he spoke seemed careful now, as if measuring every word. The teen noticed a slight hesitation in their movements that hadn't been there before. They had authority in their uniforms, but now they were uncertain, cautious. His mother didn't rush to speak harshly or yell. She approached slowly, her eyes steady, scanning the situation and taking in every detail. Her presence alone demanded attention. She looked at the teen first, giving him a reassuring nod. His shoulders relaxed slightly, though he was still tense. Just seeing her there made him feel safer, as if a shield had suddenly appeared between him and the fear he had been living through for so long. "Can you explain what is happening here?" she asked calmly but firmly, her voice carrying across the small crowd. The officers stiffened, glancing at each other, then back at her. They had been questioning the teen relentlessly, but her voice now had weight, authority that could not be ignored. One officer spoke quickly, trying to explain their reason for stopping him. They mentioned suspicious activity and a routine check, but her eyes narrowed slightly and the air seemed to change. The teen noticed her steady gaze that didn't miss a thing, a gaze that made the officers shift uncomfortably. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her calm authority spoke louder than any yell ever could. The crowd around them seemed to sense the tension too, leaning in quietly, whispering about how the officers were suddenly hesitant. The teen felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. He had been standing there, tense and scared, and now the people with authority were the officers, unsure how to act. Seeing the shift made him understand in a small but painful way how much power dynamics affected situations like this. His mother addressed the officers directly, asking for details and clarity about why her son had been stopped. She listened carefully to their explanations, her expression serious but not angry. The officers seemed to struggle, their usual confidence replaced with a carefulness that reflected her presence. Every word they spoke seemed to be weighed, every action measured. She finally turned to the teen, her expression softening. She asked if he was okay, if he had been hurt or scared. He nodded, relief flooding him. His voice came out shaky, but he tried to explain that he had been frightened, unsure of what was happening and worried about making a wrong move. She listened attentively, nodding, understanding every word without judgment. The officers seemed aware that they were being observed not only by her, but by the small crowd gathered around. They exchanged glances, their earlier confidence fading. The teen noticed the change in their demeanor, a subtle but undeniable shift from authority to caution. They no longer had the control they had moments before. His mother spoke again, calmly but with firmness, reminding the officers that the teen was young, had done nothing wrong, and deserved to be treated with respect. Her words carried weight, and the officers responded, adjusting their tone and posture. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and the tense, uncertain air around the teen began to ease slightly. The teen felt the tension in his shoulders relax, his breathing slowing as he realized that his mother's arrival had changed everything. The fear that had gripped him for what felt like hours began to fade, replaced by a sense of safety he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized in that moment how much impact her presence had, how much protection and authority could influence a situation instantly. The officers asked a few more questions, this time with more care, their words less sharp, their gestures less commanding. His mother answered calmly, clarifying details and making sure the teen's safety was prioritized. The teen watched the exchange, amazed at how quickly the balance of power had shifted. It was a lesson he would carry with him about influence, presence, and how fear and authority interact. Neighbors whispered quietly, some nodding in understanding, others just observing the scene. The teen realized that many had witnessed this moment. Many had seen how quickly the dynamic had changed when someone with authority and knowledge intervened. It was a small but important lesson in how society often judges unfairly, and how intervention could make a significant difference. His mother finally turned fully to him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. She asked him to walk with her to the car, to ensure he was safe. The teen followed, feeling the weight of the fear he had carried lift slightly. Each step toward safety was a relief, a small victory after the long ordeal of being stopped and questioned unfairly. The officers remained behind, but their expressions were careful, subdued. They were no longer the looming threat they had been just moments before. The teen realized how much the situation had depended on who was present, how quickly things could shift with the right intervention. The experience left a mixture of relief, gratitude, and lingering unease. As they walked away, his mother kept a steady hand on his shoulder, guiding him and keeping him close. She asked questions gently, making sure he was okay, and the teen responded as best he could. The relief was immense, but the memory of fear was still vivid. He knew he had been lucky, that not everyone had someone to arrive and change the course of events so quickly. They reached the car, and she ensured he got inside safely. The teen sat down, feeling exhausted from the emotional strain of the encounter. He looked out the window at the officers, the small crowd and the familiar streets, realizing how much the ordinary world could feel threatening when fear and suspicion were directed at you unfairly. His mother stayed with him for a moment, reassuring him, explaining that he had done nothing wrong, and that the situation was about bias, not about him personally. He listened, absorbing every word, feeling both comforted and enlightened. The lesson was heavy but necessary. Fear and authority could mix in ways that were unpredictable, and protection often depended on who was present. The teen exhaled, finally allowing himself to relax fully. He realized he had been lucky, that his mother's presence had been enough to shift the situation entirely. He thought about those who might not have someone to step in, those who might face similar circumstances without the safety net he had. It was a sobering thought, but also one that gave him a sense of purpose, a desire to understand and act in the future. The car drove slowly away, the neighborhood fading behind them. The teen leaned back in his seat, processing the events, still feeling the tension in his body but also the relief and gratitude. His mother's calm authority had transformed the situation, showing him a side of the world he hadn't fully understood before. It was both frightening and enlightening, a memory that would stay with him forever. He knew that he had been seen, that someone had acknowledged his humanity in a way that mattered, and that someone had protected him in a moment of vulnerability. The experience left him shaken, but it also left him with hope and understanding, a recognition of the importance of intervention, awareness, and the presence of someone who could make a difference. As they continued toward home, the teen reflected on the ordeal, feeling a mixture of relief, awe, and lingering fear. He knew that the memory of being stopped would stay with him, but so would the memory of his mother's calm authority, the way she had shifted the balance, and the way she had ensured his safety. It was a moment of fear transformed into a lesson, a reminder of the realities of bias, authority, and the protective power of those who care. The teen sat in the car, his body still tense even though the danger had passed. The quiet hum of the engine and the soft glow of the dashboard lights felt comforting after the chaos of the street. He looked out the window at the neighborhood fading behind him, the familiar houses and trees now seeming different, as if the ordeal had changed the way he saw everything. His mother drove slowly, giving him time to process, and spoke gently, asking him how he felt. He shrugged, unable to find words at first. His chest still felt tight and the adrenaline hadn't completely left his system. He realized that even though he was safe now, the memory of fear lingered, sitting heavy in his mind and body. "I was so scared, Mom," he finally said, his voice quiet. "I didn't know what to do and I felt like I couldn't move. I tried to be careful, but it didn't feel like it mattered." She nodded, her expression softening. "I know, sweetheart. And you did everything you could. You stayed calm, you followed instructions, and you reached out to me. That's all anyone could ask for in a situation like that." He leaned back in his seat, letting her words sink in. He thought about the officers, their shifting expressions, and the way their authority had changed the moment she arrived. He felt a mixture of relief and a bitter awareness that not everyone in the world had someone to intervene like that. The thought made his chest tighten again, a reminder that fear often comes from forces beyond one's control. "I just don't understand why they were watching me like that," he said. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just walking home." She glanced at him, her eyes full of understanding. "It's not about you personally. Sometimes people make judgments based on fear, assumptions, or bias. It's unfair and it's wrong. What happened today wasn't a reflection of who you are, but it shows how important it is to be careful and aware." The teen nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that the world could be unfair, that fear could come from being seen in a certain way rather than from anything he had done. It was a hard lesson, one he wished he hadn't had to learn so early, but he understood its importance. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the quiet giving him space to think. He replayed the events in his mind, From the first moment the officers stopped him to the moment his mother arrived. The fear, the tension, and the relief all blended together, leaving him exhausted but more aware of the realities around him. "I feel like I'll never forget that," he said finally. "I can't stop thinking about it, about how scared I was and how quickly everything changed when you got there." She reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's normal to feel that way. What you experienced was intense, but it's also a reminder that support, awareness, and presence can make a difference. You learned something important today about resilience and understanding the world around you." He took a deep breath, trying to let her words settle in. The tension in his muscles began to ease slightly, though his mind was still buzzing with memories of fear and uncertainty. He thought about the neighbors who had watched, the officers who had questioned him, and the small but important lesson that authority could shift with presence and knowledge. As they continued driving, he started to ask questions about what could have happened if she hadn't arrived. She answered honestly, explaining that situations like this could escalate quickly, that fear and misunderstanding often led to unfair treatment, and that not everyone had someone to intervene. Her words were calm but firm, helping him understand the reality without overwhelming him with more fear. He thought about his own reactions, how he had tried to stay calm, how he had followed instructions, and how he had reached out for help. He realized that even in fear, he had taken steps to protect himself. It gave him a small sense of pride, a reminder that he had agency even when circumstances felt beyond his control. The conversation turned to the importance of awareness, of understanding how people perceive the world and how actions can be interpreted differently. His mother explained that bias and assumptions could lead to situations like the one he had experienced, and that recognizing these realities was a step toward navigating the world more safely. He listened carefully, absorbing her words and thinking about how they applied to his life. The lesson was heavy, but it was also empowering. He realized that knowledge, awareness, and the ability to remain calm under pressure were tools he could carry with him, even in situations that felt unfair or frightening. The teen also reflected on his own emotions, acknowledging the fear, frustration, and relief that had accompanied the encounter. He realized that it was okay to feel these emotions, that they were valid responses to a difficult situation. His mother reassured him that processing these feelings was important, and that talking about them helped make sense of what had happened. As they approached their home, the teen felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The familiar streets, the comfort of routine, and the safety of home were welcoming after the intensity of the day. He felt gratitude for his mother's presence, for her calm authority, and for the way she had ensured his safety. They parked and walked inside, the warmth of home wrapping around him like a protective blanket. He finally allowed himself to exhale fully, the tension in his body releasing in waves. He felt safe, but the memory of fear remained, a reminder of the world outside and the realities he had faced. His mother sat with him in the living room, discussing the day calmly. She asked him to describe how he had felt, what he had thought, and what he had learned. He spoke openly, sharing the fear, the confusion, and the relief. She listened without judgment, validating his emotions and helping him understand the lessons embedded in the experience. The teen realized that the day had changed him. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the reality of being judged unfairly. He had also experienced relief, protection, and the power of calm authority. The combination of these experiences left him more aware, more cautious, but also more resilient. He thought about others who might face similar situations without the safety net he had. The thought was sobering, but it also motivated him. He understood that the world could be unfair, but he could carry awareness, knowledge, and resilience with him. He could also rely on those who cared for him, understanding the value of support and presence. The teen felt a mixture of exhaustion and reflection as the evening progressed. He replayed each moment in his mind, understanding the importance of calm, the necessity of cooperation, and the impact of intervention. He realized that fear and safety were intertwined in complex ways, and that awareness was a key tool in navigating the world. By the time the night grew darker, the teen felt a sense of closure for the day's events, though the memory would stay with him. He understood that the experience had taught him valuable lessons about fear, authority, resilience, and support. He also recognized the importance of sharing his experience, of learning from it, and of being aware in the future. The conversation with his mother continued into the evening. covering not only the events but also the emotions and reflections that followed. He spoke about what had frightened him, what had reassured him, and what he wished he had known beforehand. She listened patiently, offering guidance, reassurance, and understanding, helping him make sense of the complex emotions he had felt. As he prepared for bed, he thought about the day's events one last time. He acknowledged the fear, the relief, and the lessons learned. He felt gratitude for his mother's presence and guidance, for the knowledge that he was not alone, and for the understanding that fear could be managed with calm, awareness, and support. He lay down exhausted but reflective, understanding that the day had changed him. The teen knew he had faced a difficult situation, had learned from it, and had come through stronger. The memory of fear would remain, but so would the memory of protection, guidance, and the power of calm authority. The experience had been intense, but it had also been transformative, leaving him more aware, more resilient, and more prepared for the world ahead. The next morning, the teen woke up feeling a mix of exhaustion and determination. The events of the previous day were still vivid in his mind. The fear, the tension, and then the relief when his mother arrived. He had replayed the situation countless times, analyzing what had happened and why. The fear had not disappeared entirely, but he felt stronger for having endured it. He realized that understanding the experience was the first step toward moving forward. He went to the kitchen where his mother was preparing breakfast. The warm smell of food and the familiar sounds of the house were comforting, yet he felt a lingering heaviness. She noticed his thoughtful expression and asked him how he was feeling. He shrugged, unsure of how to put his emotions into words. He felt grateful for her calm presence, which had protected him the day before. But he also carried a weight of awareness about how easily situations could turn dangerous. They sat together quietly for a few moments. His mother spoke gently about the importance of reflection. She explained that understanding fear, authority, and bias could help him navigate the world more safely. He listened carefully, realizing that these lessons were not just about that single encounter but about life in general. The conversation was calm, full of patience and empathy, allowing him to process his emotions without judgment. He asked questions, wanting to know more about why people acted the way they did, why fear and assumptions could create such tension. His mother explained that while society had made progress, prejudice and bias still existed. People sometimes reacted out of fear rather than knowledge. It was a hard truth, but understanding it gave him insight and, in a way, control. He could not change others instantly, but he could prepare himself and respond wisely. The teen spent the morning thinking about what had happened. He considered how he had felt powerless, how the officers had treated him, and how quickly the situation had shifted when his mother appeared. He realized that safety and authority could be influenced by presence and awareness. It was both comforting and sobering, a reminder that privilege and protection played significant roles in life. As the day progressed, he reflected on his own reactions. He had stayed calm despite fear, followed instructions, and reached out for help. He recognized that even in a difficult and unfair situation, he had agency. That realization gave him a sense of pride and resilience. He understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act wisely despite it. He also thought about the people who might not have someone to intervene for them. The thought was sobering and made him realize how much luck, circumstance, and support affected outcomes. He felt empathy for others in similar situations and a desire to raise awareness about how bias and assumptions impacted people, especially young individuals in vulnerable positions.